Put the whoosy on the whatsy. Attach the whatsy to the whoosy. Connect the thingamajig to the thingamabob. And that'll make the whatchamacallit.
Well, hello there. Welcome back to Making Records with Eric Valentine. A lot's happened since the last time I posted a video. You know, I got a Trinov speaker tuning system. I totally rewired my home studio to do this crazy thing I'm probably gonna, talk about at some point. And oh yeah, there's a worldwide pandemic as well. This is crazy. So I don't want to labor over it too much. I'm sure everybody's been hearing plenty about the pandemic. It's inescapable. Just a couple quick things about it. We're doing okay. We're doing great. Honestly, we are just incredibly fortunate. We love being home. We have a beautiful place to live and work. We can actually work from home. So we're just super, super lucky in that way. And so I know that's not the case for everybody out there. And this thing is, causing some real hardship for people. And that sucks. We're doing everything we can to try and help however we can from home. Grace has been doing some concerts, and she's going to release some music. It's all going to be tied into Music Cares. They have a relief fund for this whole thing. I am going to include a couple of links for this particular episode in the description. And one of them will be a link to where you can donate to the Music Cares fund that is providing relief for people that are really getting hit hard by this Corona thing. So if you enjoy these videos and are as fortunate as I am that this is not totally devastated you financially and have a little bit to give, then I encourage people to do that. It's the only way we're going to survive this thing. We all got to help each other. In our little neighborhood here, it was very, very interesting. When the stay-home order was first issued, and everybody kind of freaked out and went to the grocery stores and cleaned them out. We have a little local market that we walk to. It's literally a block away from our house. It's just owned by a family here in Topanga. And I was expecting to walk in there and see empty shelves, and surprise, surprise, everything was still there because people didn't freak out, in Topanga here. It was kind of refreshing. And maybe for the few people that maybe did freak out a little bit, the store owners, because it's a privately owned market, it's easier for them to go like, no, we're not going to sell you all of the toilet paper. That's not going to help anybody. So just buy what you need, and then there will still be toilet paper here when you come back in a week, So I think it's a really important thing to understand about situations like this. Is really, panicking is probably a bigger problem than anything. The hoarding and stuff actually created a problem that wasn't there before. And so, it's kind of like I scuba dive, and there are things about scuba diving that are dangerous. You can, be 30, 40, 50 feet down and run out of air. That can be dangerous. But there's lots of things that you can do to make it so you're not going to die. You're usually close to other people. You can share a regulator. You can do things. The only thing that will kill you if you run out of air is if you fucking panic. So it's a really, really good example of, if you keep calm, take care of each other, we're going to make it through this. We'll be fine. Okay, enough about the pandemic. This episode, I've been waiting for this, and I think this is a good time for it, because I think some of us are having to make choices about what we really absolutely need and what are things that we want but don't need. And I went through this journey with this whole issue of really being able to try and pin down exactly what the differences are, even when they're very, very subtle between different equipment that's being used. What things are really making a difference in my setup that's worth me investing my money and time and energy and resources into and incorporating into my setup. And it was a real journey for me, and it just can't be overstated. It changed everything for me. I mean, it was a total revelation for me when I finally ended up in a place where I felt like I had a handle on it. And so it started when I started what became the Undertone Audio stuff, and initially I was just going to build a custom console for myself. And I was working with this brilliant circuit designer guy named Larry Jasper, and so we started very simply. It's like, let's just make an amplifier. And so this will be used in a lot of different places. It'll be reconfigured for different things, but it'll be like a line input amplifier, and it can be used as a mic preamplifier. It can be used as a summing amp for busing. It can be used for all this different stuff. It's very common in consoles. You have what they call an operational amplifier. We didn't go exactly that route because we actually really, changed things about the amplifier design to really optimize it for all of those different applications. But the basic approach was kind of the same. So we needed to start with something that we liked the sound of. And so I found myself in this position of having to sit down and listen to a line input amplifier with different sources, and while he was making all these very subtle changes to the circuitry, like a different capacitance in the feedback loop, different dielectrics in the capacitors in the feedback loop, and me trying to listen to the differences and decide which one's going to be better or not. And so this thing was happening where he would say, hey, I just changed this to a polypropylene cap instead of polyester. It's probably going to be better in the high end, and blah, blah, blah. Check this out. And I'd check it out and be like, oh, yeah, this is awesome. I love the high end of this new capacitor dielectric. It's going to be great. And then at a certain point, I got a little suspicious. And I was like, I want to prove that I'm actually hearing this difference. I want to be able to prove it. And so I set up a blind listening test for myself. I was listening to stuff. It seemed very apparent to me. I should be able to pick it out every time. And then this crazy thing happened where I would listen to the two options, knowing which is which, and hear a very clear, distinct difference between them. And then transition into doing a blind listening test, and the difference that I was hearing would vanish before my ears. And I couldn't hear it anymore. And I could not for the life of me pick out which was which accurately, in random testing. I'd have to get it right at least, to really prove that there's a difference, I'd have to get it right 100% of the time in 5 tests where somebody else is randomly swapping the sources, And so it freaked me out. I was like, what is going on? Like, I know I'm hearing this, and how can it just disappear all of a sudden? This is just crazy. And so I started researching it. And by the way, we're going down a real rabbit hole here. This is some super nerdy stuff. I hope you're ready for this journey with me. Man, like I said, it was so important for me, and has been so incredibly helpful. It informed everything about how I set up the studio that I work out of now at home. It's my favorite studio I've ever been in. And so just bear with me with this. It's a journey, but I really feel like it's worth it. So I started researching this, and I started to look into what was ultimately this broad category of the psychological influence on sensory perception. And so it's described in a lot of different ways. There's things, sometimes they'll call it confirmation bias, expectation bias. It has a lot of different names for it. And I think there's probably many of you that have gone down this road and know what I'm talking about. So you might be able to skip some of this. And so one of the places where it turned up a lot, it turned out there really weren't any really great, like, real scientific studies about the psychological influence on audio sensory perception. There was a lot of study that had been done for the sensory perception of taste because winemakers were very, very interested in this. And they did some incredible tests with wine tasting where they would put a person inside an fMRI scanner, a functional MRI scanner, which takes a real-time picture of a person's brain activity while they're experiencing something. And if you can imagine, I don't know if you've ever seen an fMRI machine, but it's not comfortable. It's incredibly claustrophobic, and they have a little tube going in where, they get like a shot of wine to taste, and then they scan what's going on with their brain when they're drinking wine. And what they did is they had 2 bottles of wine, one that was a very highly rated, expensive wine, and one that was just a much cheaper, poorly rated wine. And so they started off with people tasting, the expensive, highly rated wine, and they would know that this is the expensive, highly rated wine, and then they would taste the cheap wine. As you'd expect, most of the people would prefer the more expensive, highly rated wine. They say, oh, this is great, it has whatever, all body and blah, blah, whatever fancy wine terminology you want to throw in there. So then they switched the labels. And so the actual expensive wine had the cheap label on it. The cheap wine had the expensive label on it. Did the test with another group of people to see what would happen. And so the results were really, really interesting. Kind of what you'd expect. The cheap wine with the expensive label ended up getting the greater preference in the tests. But it wasn't just that. It's deeper than that. Because they have brain scans of what was going on in people's brains as they're tasting the wine. So are they just lying to themselves because it's a more expensive wine and they just want to feel like they're a fancy wine expert and they're going to like the same stuff that experts like, and so they're just going to say they like it? That's not actually what's happening. They are actually having a better tasting experience with the cheap wine with an expensive label on it because of the expectation bias. So they're expecting to have a better taste experience, and their brain manufactures that experience for them. And the brain scans proved it. And so the people that drank the cheap wine with the expensive label on it, the brain scans of that tasting were more closely matched the people who actually drank the expensive wine. So your brain is creating that experience. So they aren't actually lying. They really had that experience because they were expecting it. Their brain made it happen. And the same thing happens in audio as well. And that was the huge discovery for me. From that point on, like, if there's anything that's even, any level of subtlety between the two things that I'm comparing, if I'm comparing different preamps, different converters, a different brand of tape, like things that are in that more subtle realm, I always do a blind listening test. I'll never, ever just do it without a blind listening test. And with a lot of practice over the years, I've done, hundreds of blind listening tests at this point. I've gotten a little better at being able to tell where my own threshold is, where there actually are perceivable differences between two sound sources and when there's not. Because there's times where, I promise you, I can measure differences in an audio source, totally quantifiable, measurable on a scope that I know human beings can't hear. And so they're just beyond the realm of human perception. The differences are too minute. We have test equipment that is far more sensitive in certain ways that you can find a measurable difference with test equipment that there's no way a human being can hear. So there is a threshold there. There is a point, and it's probably different for different people. Depending, for me, ultimately, it was how much practice I had actually just doing listening tests. I got better at it. That was one of the things that was a huge benefit of this, was using the blind listening test to really actually know when I was hearing a difference and what to listen for, made me better at listening. And I got better and better at hearing more and more minute differences. That's really the benefit of not sort of just lying and pretending that you're hearing all these differences. You just don't get better at hearing differences because you're not dealing with reality. So that's one of the huge benefits from this. The other huge benefit is that I've been able to just decide which things really matter for me and which things don't. And I'm not going to waste my money on stuff that doesn't matter to me. You know, I mean, there's all kinds of unbelievable hyperbolic claims that get made in the world of audio. There's a healthy amount in the world of pro audio where there's recording studios. If you really want a just staggering dose of it, go into the audiophile world where they're talking about, you know, turntables and home speakers. And you can buy a digital cable for $12,000. Yeah, you can do that. So there's no shortage of, you know, hyperbolic claims in the world of audio. And so, you know, I did some tests on some things that, you know, are potentially really expensive. And, you know, like, I want my stuff to sound incredible. And people make all these extraordinary claims, and you read the testimonials and you read the claims, and it's like, man, I want that for my stuff. You know, like, that sounds great. I want to have that in my setup. And but, you know, after having this experience, I always test it. And I don't just go by the claims and go into listening to it with all of those crazy testimonials ringing in your ears about, oh, the amazing wide image and this and the clarity and that, and the bottom end is so focused and it's so much better. It's a massive improvement because of this, that, or the other, blah, blah. Listen to it yourself and see if it really makes a meaningful difference for you. So I'm trying to figure out where to go next with this. There's some really interesting things here. So I think before we just dive into listening to some of the sound tests that I did, and I'm going to share these audio files with you. That's going to be the other link in the description. You'll be able to go download the audio files, listen to them yourself. You know, they're 96K, 24-bit audio files in your own space, and do these listening tests yourself and see what you think. But before we do that, I want to do one more thing that was just a complete mind blower for me. I literally just about fell out of my chair the first time I saw this. So some of you may have crossed paths with this in your travels as an audio person. It came up in when I was researching all of this stuff. And it just, I don't know. There's just, I don't know what to say about all this. Okay, so let me pull this in here so we can see it. Okay, so this is a thing called the McGurk effect. And it's a really good illustration of how your brain can totally alter what you're perceiving with your ears. It's a little bit of a unique circumstance because it's related to language, and there's a whole specific speech center for the brain, specifically for language. So it's not exactly the same as just listening to music or a sound source, but I think there's enough there that it does relate, and it really illustrates what's going on here. Okay, so this guy is a neuroscientist, and he studies linguistics and stuff, and I stumbled onto this in a BBC documentary. It's a thing called the McGurk effect. In the 70s, there was this scientist studying linguistics called something McGurk, Dr. McGurk, and he discovered this crazy thing, that human beings recognize speech not just with your ears, but with your eyes as well. And that's why, like, reading lips can work really well for people who are deaf. You know, they'll read lips and they can really do quite well just reading lips alone. Here's the thing, is that your brain, okay, this is so bizarre. So you hear sounds. Speech is entirely sound. You would think that your brain would prioritize what you're hearing over what you're seeing because you are listening for spoken sounds to recognize what is being said. But it's the other way around. Your brain will prioritize what you're seeing with your eyes, over what you're hearing, and have what you're hearing match what you're seeing. And you cannot undo this. There's no way around it. It's really incredible. Okay, so watch this video, and I know it's goofy. It's a guy just going bah, but here you go. Check this out. So here's the first clip. Ba, 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 ba. Okay, close up on a guy's face saying ba. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay. Here's the next clip. Check this out. Ba, 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 ba. Okay, so close up of a guy's face saying fa with an F, right? Pretty straightforward. Here's the thing. The sound that you are hearing in both of those clips is identical. The sound is ba with a B in both clips. So try this. I'm going to play the second clip again. Start off with your eyes open and then close them and see what you hear. Ba, 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 ba. That still just melts my brain every time I experience that. It's just so unbelievable. The sound literally transforms back into ba with a B when you close your eyes, because your eyes are being prioritized over your ears. So your brain is seeing fa with an F, and it modulates the sensory input from your ears to sound like fa. It changes what you're hearing. So try this one. This is cool. So now it's a split screen. And so if you look to one side of the screen, one image, you will hear fa. If you look to the other image, you'll hear ba. Check it out. Ba, 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 ba. I mean, yeah, I'm just speechless every time I see that. It's so unbelievable. And so I think the relevance of this is that when you go to compare a couple of things, let's say you're going to compare a Neve preamp, an original vintage Neve preamp, to a reissue one, or somebody else, like a Brent Averill one or something. And you're comparing the two, and you have this idea in your mind that the vintage one's just going to be a little sweeter sounding. It's just going to have that slightly better high end and sound a little bit fuller and have more classic quality to it. You will hear that if you go into that comparative listening with that mindset. Your brain will make you hear it. And whatever subtle differences are there don't matter, because your expectation is way more powerful than any of the subtle differences between those two devices. That's just the reality of it. There's no getting around it. So that was sort of the revelation for me. And it went through this sort of arc of like, oh my God, I can't hear anything at all. Like, what's going on? All these differences that I thought were there are not actually there. What's going on? And, it was like this total crazy, destabilizing thing where I thought I don't know what I'm doing, And then once I started doing more and more listening tests, I got better at it and started to really tune into where the threshold, my threshold was for what I could hear and couldn't hear, and got very comfortable with that. There's things I can't hear. I learned some stuff along the way. You know, there was one listening test that I did where somebody else could pick it out every single time and I couldn't. And it fucking pissed me off. And I asked them, what are you listening for? I can't hear any damn difference in this. And they said, listen to the reverb tails. And as soon as I did that, I could pick it out every time. It's really cool. So there's an opportunity to actually really learn and get better at hearing very subtle differences. So, and it's one of those things where you just got to be really honest with yourself and with everybody else in the room. Put your ego aside and like, I'm here to fucking get better at shit, you know? And so there it is. That's the journey. And so now I'm going to have some examples here of stuff that listening tests that I did. I have this drive that's called sound tests, and I've done exhaustive amounts of listening tests. So here we go. Here's sound tests, and so you can just look at all of this stuff. So I'm just like all these Bach mics and Burl converters and connectors and different capsules in my 251 and the Horus converters, different transformers for mic preamps. There's new mic pre-design tests. It's just on and on and on and on in here of me just doing tons and tons of listening tests. And so I'm gonna highlight a couple of these for you. So the first one we're gonna check out was the company Burl was nice enough to loan me one of their mothership converters, and I was very curious about it because they were the only people that were taking a more sort of analog approach to digital conversion, where they're really emphasizing the use of a transformer and having the analog circuitry have a sound to it. You know, like, hey, the old tape machines that we used to record on, that analog circuitry had a sound to it, so why shouldn't the converters, you know? And it was a cool idea, and I was very, very excited to check those out. At the time, I was in the midst of the second Slash record, and so there was a little bit of time off in there. He had to take off and do something, and so I did a test to compare the two. And so I set up, I had the unit in there. I set it up, as a bunch of digital inputs on one of my 192s. So this was an HD rig. I was, using all Avid 192s, and so I was able to capture in simultaneously the stuff that I recorded into the 192s and capture it into the Burls. And in this case, there's no tape machines involved. This is me just going directly digital into the computer. I wanted to do that because I was thinking, hey, maybe this Burl thing, will be analog-y enough. I can just use that and not fuck with tape machines anymore. So I did that, and as I usually do when I'm doing sound tests, I'll record a Led Zeppelin song. So that's what I did. I recorded Heartbreaker. So this is me playing the first opening little bit of Heartbreaker, one instrument at a time. So here, we'll start with the 192s, and you can check this out. So you get the idea there. Me playing Heartbreaker, trying to get the same sounds and stuff. And so this is the version that was recorded through 192 converters into the computer, and then here's all the individual tracks. I'll blow through those real quick if you guys want to hear the individual stuff on this. all of these originally were being sent out to channels on the Undertone audio console. And so everything was captured simultaneously with the Burl converters here, and those were assigned to the same channels on the Undertone console. I kind of had everything set up that way for tracking Slash, and so I needed to leave that set up. So I just did a mix of it on the Undertone console. That's what you just heard. And so then each version was recorded back in, so like the 192 tracks that got mixed on the Undertone console got recorded back in through a 192, and the Burl tracks got recorded back in through the Burl converter. So there was 2 generations of the different types of converters that would hopefully accentuate the differences between them. So check this out. This is a thing that I found recently, actually, just before doing this episode. So I had different ways of doing it in the past, but this makes it super easy. And kudos to Hofa. It's a a company that makes plugins. They made this plugin for doing blind A/B tests in your computer, and it's really, really cool. It's super, makes it super easy. And there's actually a couple things about it that are really great, because it, when you switch back and forth, there's no glitching. You'll see. It's awesome. Okay, so what you do is you put the plug in, and I highly recommend, if you're going to go down this rabbit hole of blind listening, get this plug-in. This is the way to do it in the computer, for sure. So you put the plug in on the 2 or 3, however many sources you're A/Bing. You put it on both of those sources. It recognizes the tracks that the plugins are instanced on, and they will show up here. And then you can just start soloing back and forth. So there's the 192. Oh, I gotta have them both soloed. There's the Burl. So pretty close there. There is a difference with these, and this one, I've done this test a bunch of times. This is a difference that I can hear and I can pick out pretty much every time. It's not like glaringly obvious, but it's definitely within the realm of my perception. And so the difference that I hear between these two things is the little bit of extra distortion that you get in the high end from the transformers. And so the Burl version just sounds a little bit brighter, a little bit more immediate, because it has this, harmonic coloration in the high end on it. So it just feels a little more energized up there. So I'm going to just loop a section. This is one of the things that's very, very important about doing blind listening tests. One of the things that I learned in this process is, for me, and I believe all the people that are really serious about doing really intense comparative listening, you have to loop a short section that you're comparing. Because as this thing is playing through, and I'm hearing one section of one thing, and then I switch to another, and I'm hearing a different section of the music, that can fool you into hearing differences that aren't there, because I hit the snare drum a little bit harder, or the hi-hat opened up a little more, or something changed in the performance that you're listening to. When the difference is very, very subtle technically between the equipment that's being used, the differences in performances can trick you into hearing a difference that's not there. So loop a short section when you're trying to do this for real. Let me try and get a good loop here. Okay, so we'll just do this right here. Boop, 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 boop. Hopefully this is a good section. We'll try and make it seamless. All right. So here we go. 1 bar section. Okay, I'm gonna do this test. right before your all's eyes and see if I get it right. So what happens? You see the dice here? You hit start. All of a sudden, you can't see what's what. And it has randomly reversed these, or not. You don't know. So now we don't know which is which, and we'll start soloing back and forth. I got to cover this up, because you will see what's going on here, what's being muted or not. So I got to cover this up with the plugin. So now it'll be a viable test here. I can't cheat. Okay. Okay, I'm going to say that this is the burl. Yeah, there it is. That little bit of extra energy in the high end is the giveaway for me. That's what I notice. You will have access to those files. You can play with it and check it out. There's a couple other fun things that that happen with this. With this thing. So here's the original Heartbreaker. Check this thing out. And I'm going to set up a little loop for this too, right before the drums come in. Let's hear the opening guitar. Check this out. Right? I thought my guitar sound was pretty cool until you hear the original again. It's a whole other situation. Here's something I didn't have when I did this, re-recorded this. I didn't have FabFilter's EQ match, and I just couldn't resist. I had to do it. So here it is. Look at that insanity that it did. And now check out the guitar, my guitar. And then there's the original, and there's mine. Man, I wish I had that when I did this originally, because here it is without it. Pretty long ways away. So cool. So yeah, another vote for EQ match being the coolest thing ever. So then, what was the other thing that was interesting about this? Well, I guess I should say, I did not end up buying the Burl converters in that test. I ultimately, when I really lived with the differences, listened in my car, listened to a lot of different systems, I ultimately realized, like, I get the coloration, most of the coloration that I'm going after from tape machines. And other outboard gear. I have a lot of outboard gear that has a lot of color to it. You know, a lot of old vintage preamps. The undertone stuff is all designed to incorporate that type of color in it. And so I decided, I think I want my converters to just sound as invisible as possible. I'll deal with the color with all the other gear that I've accumulated over the years that does it really, really great already. I don't need it from my converters. So I ended up not getting the Burls, but they sound beautiful. And listening to this again now, with the monitoring that I have now, I may have chose differently because it's very, very flattering in this context. And I think the monitoring that I had at the time was harder for me to appreciate the mid-range, and what I have now is I can really celebrate the mid-range better. So I even did that on these, you know, like added a little bit of 1.5K. You know, I was always sort of running away from that because I was listening on NS10s, which have a 6 dB spike at 1.5K. So yeah, listening on this system, the Burls were, I think, actually a little more impressive. So there's that, and if you want to do a quick jaunt through the individual tracks, we can do that. So here's the drums on this thing, and so we're hearing this stuff totally unaffected. I guess there's a gate on this snare drum mic, which I'm actually not even monitoring at this point. A little bit of a room sound and a batter kick drum. I did, what did I do here? Nothing, actually. Okay, maybe I was playing with phase on that. But here's just the raw, uneq'd drum tracks. The kick drum, I remember using this on almost all of that, the Slash record, is a Vistalite, a red Vistalite 24-inch kick drum with just Remo coated Ambassador bass drum heads on both sides. Snare drum, my old trusty Pearl Export. I've talked about it before. It's a cheap, shitty snare drum. It just sounds incredible, and so it always wins, especially for this like barky sort of Bonham-y type stuff. You can hear the close mic on it here. I'll ungate it. Yeah. Yeah, that's my little Pearl Export. So the overheads, I ended up doing left, center, right overheads on this, and that's why I had the snare drum turned down, because there's a center mic that really is carrying most of the snare drum duties. And it just sounds so much cooler. It sounds like a real drum, you know? And so these are 3 Coles 4038s placed around the drum kit, equidistant from the snare drum. So I measure them off, so they're all the same distance from the snare drum. You can hear them all together. One of the things that you get with, you know, Fig 8 microphones, you can hear the crash cymbal way over on that side, and then the other crash cymbal way over on the other side. I place the left and right ones so the knoll of this mic is looking at the cymbals on the left side of the kit. The knoll of this one is looking at the cymbals on the right side of the kit. So the cymbals totally cancel out in each of these microphones. You get this beautiful wide stereo image of the cymbals and the toms and stuff on the drum kit. And actually you'll see there's no tom mic. So I think those were all being picked up with the Coles. There's a room going on here. And I got a little like slappy delay. Something they did a lot on Bonham's drum mixes. You can hear that in there. You get that sort of diffused slap back, that sort of breath after the hits. And then here's the old, what I call the kick/snare mic. So this is a microphone that's on the batter side of the kick drum underneath the snare drum. It just adds a nice snap to the kick drum. So here it is all together again. And obviously when it was being mixed on the console, I brightened it up a lot and shaped the low end a little and stuff. So this obviously sounds much flatter than the mix here. You can hear it. We can hear that again. Oh boy, that EQ is only good for the guitar. Yeah, so there it is with all the EQ and, you know, shenanigans on the console, compression and stuff like that. Don't have the console here, can't demonstrate that part of it. So then here is the bass sound. So that is this crazy K bass. It looks like an SG. I think I've talked about it before in the All American Rejects episode because we used it for the distorted bass on that song, Gives You Hell. That bass is incredible for distorted bass. And so it's that bass going through a little Boss parametric EQ pedal into a magnetone amp, the 480 something or other magnetone amp. And so I use the parametric EQ pedal to boost a bunch of real grindy mid-range and have even more level and just hit the amp super hard. But all the distortion is just the amp itself distorting. And that was the closest I could get. The original sound seems like it might be a Leslie speaker or something. I'm not sure exactly. It's an incredible bass sound on the original song. There was a certain point where I realized, like, oh my God, the verse is just bass. That's not even guitar. It's all bass, you know. Until, I just hadn't really tuned into that, and I realized it was a revelation at one point. I just about crashed my car. It's like, oh my God, it's bass. So yeah. Yeah, it definitely got fattened up with EQ on the console. I can tell that I was boosting a bunch of that sort of like 80, 90 hertz stuff on the console. So then the guitar is a combination of a close mic and a room sound. So and it's double tracked. It's double tracked on the original as well. So there's the close mic. There's the room mic. And this ended up being, when I was tracking the Slash record, we were basically recording it live. And so, it was Brent playing drums, but I had both Miles and Slash playing guitar live when we were doing the basic thing. Todd playing bass, Brent on drums, Slash and Miles playing guitar. And so Slash, as you'd expect, was playing a Les Paul through a Marshall, through a modified Marshall. And so I would use Miles as more like the texture guy. And so I could use different combinations of guitars and amps to have some different textures there. But we ended up using a lot of AC30. I have an original 60s top boost AC30 that everybody tells me that it's exceptional or whatever, and anytime I have an amp guy work on it, they try and buy it off me. It's a beautiful sounding amp, and so it's that amp with a Silvertone guitar. The Silvertone Jupiter was the guitar that was used on it, and I don't think there was any pedals or anything. It was just that guitar and that amp, just loud as fuck in the hallway at Barefoot. Close mic and a room mic, and so then it's doubled here, and so you get this. Da-da-da. And there you go, Heartbreaker guitar stylings. So that's it. It was just drums, bass, and 2 guitar passes was the whole thing. So now we can move on to another sound test that we did. So there was a certain point, and I think at this point I'm going to reveal who the manufacturer is on this thing. For a long time, I did a whole post on Gear Sluts about this that just initiated this unbelievable firestorm on on this thread. Some of the nastiest exchanges I've ever seen in my life happened on this thread, talking about external clocking for digital audio. Just, I don't know. And so, and in that round, I didn't want to say who it was. I don't want to, have it reflect negatively on anybody, but at this point, it's so long ago. This company's doing great. Nobody's going to care about my little fucking sound test. The story is hilarious, so I'm going to tell the whole story with the whole thing. And everybody sort of guessed who it is, There's one company that sort of made their mark with external clocking. And I actually own one of their products now, and I love it, and I use it all the time. Doesn't have to happen to be a clock, but they make great stuff and they're wonderful. So there you go. The company is Antelope, and they sort of, arrived on the scene with this atomic clock thing, and everybody was freaking out about it. When you, like I was saying earlier, you read the description of what you're going to get with this thing and read the testimonials from all these extraordinary folks that use it, on and on about how it made my whole system sound 20, 30% better. The imaging is better. It's wider. It's clearer, more focused. Everything's more musical, blah, 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 on and on and on. I was like, I want all of that. I want to make super wide, awesome, better stereo imaged everything. I want to do that. So I arranged an opportunity to try it. And I told them I'm going to, do this super duper, intense test to really just confirm for myself that that this is going to happen. That it's really a difference that's going to work for me. So I set up this whole test. It took a long time. Sometimes doing this, you have to put a lot of care into it to make sure that you're isolating the one variable that you're testing for. In this case, it was clocks. And so everything else has to be identical. Only the clocks can be different. And that can be really tricky to do. And I spent an entire first half of a day just setting up for this. It was like 6 hours of going through and making sure everything was going to be identical. So I have at Barefoot, there's 2 studios. There's Studio A, Studio B. And so I have 2 identical Pro Tools rigs. So I pulled the Pro Tools rig out of Studio B, brought it into Studio A. It was already kind of a hassle to begin with. And, I was going to set that one up with the external clock, leave the other one with the internal clock. Then I went through a whole exhaustive process of making sure that all of the trim calibrations were exactly identical. And so this is extremely important when you're doing comparative listening. A difference of 1/10 of a dB can make you think one thing is more present, more forward sounding, clearer, whatever. The levels have to be identical. And so I went through and recalibrated both of those Pro Tools systems, which I'd done before, but I had to make sure that everything is going to be at least 1/10 of a dB or better in the calibration, consistent across the board. So I went through that whole process. It takes forever. It's really, really tedious. So it's what you'd expect. I have, a test tone sound source. I plug it into an input. I look at it on the meter. The original, the 192s had little trim calibrations on them. I go through and calibrate every single thing so it would show up at exactly -18. So I went through that whole process. And then the outputs that I was using in order to recapture the mix in, I made sure that those were calibrated perfectly, blah, blah, blah. So the whole loop was going to be exactly the same level. Took a long time. Then I needed a sound source. So I ended up using a Nickel Creek analog master. So this was all information that was recorded directly to an analog master. It had never touched a computer before, so it had never been digitized before. A pure analog source. And I actually just put passive mults on the output of the tape machine to go to both rigs simultaneously. So they'd both be seeing the identical signal, the same playback off of the machine, because each time you hit play on a tape machine, it can be a little bit different. So it needed to be identical playback. They'd be captured at the same time into the 2 systems. So it took a long time to set that up. Got it all set up. The guy showed up with the clock. I set it, put it on the Studio B rig. Everything was going, and so I was just chatting with the guy from Antelope, and was explaining the whole test setup, and he said at a certain point when I was just going through all the sort of exhaustive detail and all the care and attention that was being put into everything in the setup, he was like, "Wow, this is really cool. Nobody's ever done anything like this before." I was like, really? Nobody's ever really actually tested if this thing really makes a difference or not? All right. I was like, okay, cool. Then, that's great. We'll really be able to check this thing out. But I just couldn't believe it that nobody had ever really tested this thing before. So there you go. People are just listening. They plug it in and listen and go, oh, wow, I'm hearing all these differences, So we get to the point where I'm actually starting to, monitor stuff through the systems, and my plan was that I would capture it into both systems. I already had a mix set up in the computer that I'd just done quickly that day, and I'd already set it up where both systems were just being clocked internally, and so I had the mix set up, and then what we would do is play back the mix. I literally did the mix on one system, copied the Pro Tools session over to the other system. So it was the identical mix settings on both systems, and then we would record it back in. So we would capture all the individual tracks in, clocked differently. We'd have the mix get played back and captured in, clocked differently, and then we'd be listening back to those mixes clocked differently. So that's 3 generations of it being clocked differently, and would hopefully exaggerate whatever differences there are. And it's a more real-world test because that's what people would be doing. You'd be making a mix, capturing everything in, then making a mix, then capturing it back in again, and then listening to it. So this was a more real-world test. That's what I wanted to do. I was explaining that to him. I had both the systems just on input. I was getting ready to hit record, and just explaining how things were set up. It was on, we were set up on a small undertone console that I had available at the time, and I was switching back and forth between the external sources, explaining to him. So this one is going to be the system that is clocked externally, and this is the internal clock system. Right away, right then, he didn't miss a beat. Wow, do you hear that? I was like, whoa, hear what? I mean, we weren't even really doing the test yet. From where I'm sitting, it literally sounds like you're switching from mono to stereo. It's what he said in that moment. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. Well, this will be great. This will be really easy for you to hear the difference. It's so cool that you're hearing such a huge difference. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there going these sound identical to me. He was doing what he's supposed to do. He's there to sell stuff, and so he was trying to sell stuff, and I respect that. It's awesome, and he's good at it. So we did the whole thing. I recorded them in, and we're talking about the whole process. Recorded back in again. Record the mix back in, and then we finally at the place where it's like, okay, here we go. We have our test result. We can listen to the two back and forth, and I let him A-B back and forth. It's like, wow, it sounds so incredible. The external clock is just making everything so much, wider and beautiful and blah, blah, on and on and on and on. And I said, okay, that's cool. You want to do a blind listening test? This is this other thing that I'm really into right now, and this is like a really great opportunity to do that. He said, sure, great. And I explained to him what I'm going to do. All right, we're going to listen to this thing 5 times. I'm going to flip a coin each time, and based on the coin flip, I'm either going to swap the cables going to the external inputs on my monitor section, or I'm not. And so you won't know if they were swapped or not. But this is going to be easy for you. The differences are very obvious, so let's do it. Listening test number 1. Here we go. And so I hit playback, and all of a sudden you can just see a little bead of sweat forming on his forehead as he's listening, and makes a call. Great. Document it. Don't tell him if he's right or wrong. Listening test number 2. Here we go. Bing! Coin flip, swap or not. Listening test takes even a longer time this time, listening to the two. Basically, we get through all 5 listening tests, and as you'd expect, he was right about 50% of the time. Basically, totally random. He would have gotten the same result just guessing with the speakers off. And so then there was all kinds of excuses about, hey, the monitoring this and blah, blah, and that and whatever. But hey, when we first set it up, it was sounding like I was switching from mono to stereo, and then all of a sudden you can't pick them out. So I posted the whole thing on Gear Sluts. There were all kinds of people arguing about it, people claiming there's all these massive differences, people claiming there weren't. They were arguing, going crazy. And so for the people that were claiming they were hearing a difference, I was like, great. I would love to learn what you're hearing. And anybody that's in LA wants to come in and take a blind listening test that I put on and do it correctly, come on down. I'll test you and see what happens. And so there was a gentleman that said, I can definitely pick these out for sure, every time. Came in, 50-50. Couldn't get it. It's just happened every time. So nobody's ever been able to pick out these files, 100% of the time. It usually ends at 50-50. So here they are. Here's the files. That was the story. That's the journey. Okay. This is a song by Nickel Creek called Can't Complain. And you know what? We'll use the super awesome Hofa A being doodad because it's very seamless when you switch between them. It's really wonderful for that. So I'm going to solo these two things. Here we go. Here's the plugin. So we can see what they are. So this is internal clock. Just the Pro Tools system clocked with internally. And this is the same exact stuff on, a perfectly calibrated additional Pro Tools rig, clocked externally with the Antelope Atomic Clock. So here we go. Here's internal. We're starting on the internal one.
I helped her live and made her wanna die. She can.
So that's internal clock.
She can complain.
There's the external clock.
Friend of mine. I was at his house when she came to see.
So again, if you want to have even a chance of being able to pick out any differences with these, you got to just loop a small section. So you're always comparing the same section of what you're listening to. When the differences are this small, you can really get tricked by other things. So here's a little section I sort of set up as a loop. I like this because the bass is in there. It clears out a little bit. You can hear reverb on the vocals. I thought this would, give me the best chance of picking it out. So this is how I would do it.
Took off for the weekend, had quite a time. Took off for the weekend, had quite a time. Took off for the weekend, had quite a time. Took off for the weekend.
So, just switch each time it comes around and try and tune in to whatever differences there might be. You can listen for all the stuff that people describe, when they use this external clock. I'm not going to bore everybody with trying to do this test right now because I know I can't do it. I've tried it a bunch of times. I've never been able to do it. Never been able to do it with headphones on, whatever. I thought maybe with my new monitoring setup in this studio, because I haven't tried it since I've been set up here in Topanga. Maybe that would make the difference. I tried it a little bit earlier today, and when I was setting up for this, no, can't pick them out blind. It's not happening. So, but the files will be available for you, and you can download them, check them out. If somebody out there really, feels like they can, really do this blind, I'd love to hear about it. Maybe just describe what you're listening for, and we can all get better at this. The other thing that's really important that I wanted to, this just sort of illustrates a point with all of this. Let me go back to my. There's another thing that's really, really important with this. So, and this just illustrates it. So, you can take a quick look at this picture and try and remember all the details about it. There's a lot of stuff going on there. Mad scientist in his little laboratory. Dun, dun, dun. And, it's very, very difficult when you're relying on your memory for something that you're comparing. And so that's why it's been very difficult for me to test particular things. People have made a big deal about power amps. And it's really difficult to have a setup where you can switch instantaneously from one power amp setup to another. Typically what happens is you have a power amp setup and you have wires going to the input and it's powered on and it's going to the speakers that you're listening to. and you listen, and then you have to stop, and it takes probably 5, maybe 10 minutes to unplug that one, plug in another power amp, hook up the speakers, turn it on. Maybe the levels are matched, maybe they're not, and then you listen. By that time, so much time has passed. Like the possibility of hearing the subtle differences between two power amps is almost impossible. I mean, there's no way. So now, look at this picture. What changed in these two pictures? You know, there's a lot that's different in these pictures, but it's very difficult to remember when a lot's happened in between. But when you go like this and instantaneously switch back and forth, all the differences reveal themselves very obviously. Makes it way, way, way easier. So when you're trying to compare stuff, if you can't switch instantaneously, you're kind of just kidding yourself, you know. It's just, it makes it way, way more difficult. So that's where, like, this, you know, this A-Being plugin comes in really handy because it switches so seamlessly. There's no clicks or pops or glitches when you're switching in between. That can be really distracting as well. And you just instantaneously switch from one sound source to another. You can really tune into whatever the subtle differences are because it just, right in that instant of change from one to the other, can reveal itself. So those are just, you know, all the things that over time, doing a lot of these blind listening tests, have, you know, proven themselves to be invaluable for really being able to hear super minute differences when you're trying to get into that.
So that's really kind of what's really important about this is that, and you know, all these files will be available. There'll be a Dropbox link. You guys can download them, AB all you want. I'm excited to see what happens in the comments. If there's people out there that really feel like you're nailing this thing 100% of the time. Again, I would love to learn how to do that. If there's somebody that's really, really able to do it, I'd love to know what you're listening for. But this is the thing that I think is so important about this, is you're really able to parse what things are really, really important and are really going to make the difference. You know, this atomic clock thing is not fucking cheap, you know? And for me, like, if it was really doing the things that they were claiming, then it could very well be worth that. And there are times where external clocks are really, really important. You know, the system that I have, whatever it is, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 different digital converters in my setup here. And so I need to be able to clock everything to get it all to work together. And so, you know, I use the Lavery converter as my, you know, master clock, and that gets distributed to everything, so things are being clocked externally. And so there are contexts where having an external clock is important, and having a good one, I'm sure, you know, is better than having a bad one. But in my humble opinion, clocks don't have a fucking sound. Like, they're either shit's in sync or it's not. And when it's in sync, it sounds right. And if it's not, then it clicks and there's all kinds of digital errors and it fucks up and there's problems. But digital clocks don't have a sound. I'm not listening to that fucking square wave. And so I'm not going to spend $8,000 on a goddamn clock that I'm not even listening to. It's not in the goddamn audio path. So that's my opinion about it. I'm passionate about it. I'm glad that there's people out there that are trying to make clocks that sound great, and trying to make digital audio sound better. I applaud their efforts. But I would much rather spend that $8,000 on some things that will really make a difference, like an immediate difference in my world. A new microphone, you know, like put up a U87 versus an Audix whatever, and you will hear a difference that you can pick out every single time. There's no question about it. It's a huge difference, you know? Or whatever, an 1176 versus a plug-in, or, you know, whatever. There are things out there that have very, very tangible differences that can make a huge difference in the emotional impact of the music that you're making. And I would much rather focus my resources on the things that make a big difference that I hear every time, without a doubt. Like, that's a huge difference that I feel and hear every time I use this particular tool in my arsenal, you know. And save money and not waste it on things. You know, like my home studio now, I'm using all fucking Hosa cables. Cables don't have a fucking sound to me, you know. I went through an era where I was using these like Wire World gold mic cables on everything, and you know they cost a fucking bazillion dollars. They're crazy expensive, and it's one of those things where maybe, possibly, I haven't had them around since I was really doing blind listening tests, but I think it's likely if you did a blind listening test with them, you probably couldn't hear the damn difference, you know. And it's like, you save that money and spend it on something else. Buy a fucking Hosa mic cable, and you know, it's just not a difference that's going to make your song feel any better, you know. And so that's what I think is really important about it in this time right now. You know, there may be situations out there where people are having to like tighten their belts and make choices about stuff that they may have to get rid of or not, or whatever, or what to get or not get. And this is an empowering way to make those choices and get the things that will really, really make a difference for you to make better music that feels better, that has a better impact. Focus on the things that really make a difference in your setup. So there you are. That was my comparative listening journey saga thing. I don't know if anybody out there is going to be as passionate about it as I am, but I hope this is helpful for you all out there. And it can't be said enough. Be safe out there. I know this all this isolation stuff is not easy, but I think there are things about it that are important. We're definitely practicing that here, and being careful to try and protect ourselves. You know, for me, I'm kind of vulnerable with this. A while ago, I sort of fucked my lungs up, you know, with a really bad bout of the flu, and so if I caught this thing, it could be a real problem for me. So I'm trying to not do that. So be safe, stay healthy, take care. I'll see you next time. Good night.
You put the whoosy on the whatsy, attach the whatsy to the whoosy, connect the thingamajig to the thingamabob, and that'll make the whatchamacallit go. You hook the gidget to the gadget, adjust the gadget to the gidget, unhook the dingly-dang from the diddly-doo.